Okay, welcome everybody to Politics in a Pint. I am Maya Hermerding. I am a McCarthy Center student coordinator. I coordinate all of the Politics in a Pint here this year. Thank you so much for attending. I know there are so many campus events going on tonight, so I'm glad you're here, and I hope you choose to participate in as many as you can today. So, we will be discussing feminism as a political movement, as you know today, and we are joined by some highly qualified and very empowering women today. From the political science department, we have Dr. Claire Haeg joining us. She teaches US politics, Congress, gender and politics. We're excited to hear what she has to say. Next to her, we have Magnolia Ditzler, senior. Yes, she is doing an honors thesis on feminism. I will let her elaborate more on that. Yeah, broad. Next to her, we have Dr. Madhu Mitra. Yes, thank you. And she is from the English department, but also teaches gender studies and humanities courses. And chair of the gender studies department, intern. And next to Dr. Mitra, we have Dr. Anna Mercedes from the Theology department. She teaches feminist theology. If you have not taken it, highly recommend it. Without further ado, oh, just kidding. You'll see on the table there are a number of sheets of paper. If you don't have any, please feel free to use notebook paper, raise your hand, and I'll get something over to you. That's where you'll be writing questions, and then once you have a question, you can hold your hand up, and a McCarthy Center worker will come grab it and bring it up to the panel for them to respond to your questions. Before that, each of the panelists will have about 5 minutes to speak on how their research or their field of study intersects with our topic tonight. Enjoy.
Maya, is it possible for them not to say the what? Oh, that's no March Madness. Okay. I don't know if this is actually going to work. Is that working now? No? Well, then I'll take it off and speak directly to it then. Right, so yes, my name is Claire Haeg, and I do teach a course on gender and politics. I'm also interested in the research on the specifically women's representation issues in legislatures worldwide. But I thought I'm also interested in the way that social movements have an impact on politics in particular, and so I would, if I'm going to talk about feminism as a movement, I wanted to talk about this chart up here, if you can all see that. So this is basically yeah, sorry about that. You can't see it there. So basically this is a way in which political scientists model how social movements over time can change. And of course, all social movements themselves, feminism, for a start, is a huge social movement. So the women's movement, you can say, has many stages, and we call them waves of feminism. But also, over time, the women's movement itself has gone through some of the changes that are in that chart. So you can see you have this women's movement, and if we just take that wave of feminism that started in the 60s and 70s, you can see the women's movement has done several things. Has in fact done many of these things. So a movement can go from like rallies, and then it can institutionalize. And the way that the women's movement institutionalized, in that it it formalized, it moderates its goals, it has goals, it develops them. They adopt conventional action, what we call a repertoire of conventional actions, and they integrate into government institutions. So you can see the women's movement has done this, not just in the Women's Caucus in Congress, but also like National Organization of Women and Narrow Pro-Choice, Emily's List, which is an organization that raises money for pro-choice women, but also the Susan B. Anthony List, which is a sort of conservative, raises money for pro-life candidates. So you can see sort of some institutionalization going on within the movement, and then commercialization's odd, and you might not even think about this, like how does a social movement commercialize, but Ms. Magazine, for example, would be an example of commercialization. Involution is kind of an odd one too, and you can see the way in which social movements become self-help groups. So for like breast cancer, all of those sort of individualized, smaller scale groups. And then radicalization, there was actually a radicalized sort of, you've heard of radical lesbian feminism. Well, there were lots of small radical groups that were part of the women's movement over time. So you can apply this to anything. This is actually about the Tea Party. This was the end of my Trump and the Tea Party talk. So it just shows you that social movements are anyway. So my view would be like, let's see how social movements transform themselves by institutionalizing. Social movements have to have goals in order to make change, and so they can do that through this political system without sort of upending the Constitution. That would be the goal.
Cool. My name is Magnolia Ditzler. I'm a senior at St. Ben studying gender studies. And I was just saying before the panel started that I've had classes with Madhu and Anna, and came to a couple of things that Claire has talked at, and so anything that I'm saying is kind of anything I've learned from these people. So I'm doing a capstone project, though, on the modern feminist movement and consumerism, specifically asking how the image of the modern feminist woman as a consumer either limits or enables feminism. And I've been really specifically interested in this for the past couple of years. I've sort of noticed that, and then researched and have been confirmed that this is actually happening, that a lot of younger feminists, so our generation, high school students, and then 20s and 30s, are really looking for an individualistic, but also like a consensus on feminism. Young feminists want a consensus. Feminism equals equality. You've all probably heard that feminism is the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. Something that I kind of reject in this paper. I want to challenge you all tonight to think less about equality and more about feminism as a political theory for dismantling systems of oppression. When we try and focus on consensus versus on focusing on dismantling systems of oppression, sometimes, the message can get watered down, or, we're so focused on saying everybody should be a feminist or everybody should believe in these feminist ideals that sort of any choice you make as a woman therefore becomes a feminist choice. And so, would we say the same thing for all men? If, whatever choice a man makes, is that a feminist thing? No, not necessarily. And so I'm really concerned with feminism as an accessory, buying a t-shirt that says you're a feminist versus, doing the political work and the theoretical work, and, understanding the choices you make as choices for liberation, if that makes sense. There's one more thing I want to say. I guess that'll have to be it for now. I'm excited about your questions. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, this one? This way.
Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you. What I have to say actually nicely follows what Magnolia was just talking about. I am an English professor, so when I got invited to do this and I saw feminism as a political movement was the theme of this, and I immediately get stuck on those words, right? What else would it be? Of course it's a political movement. But then I was talking to someone about this, and this person said that, but no, a lot of people think of it as a social movement. And I said, okay, well, what's the difference, right? And so, of course, I did what all researchers would do. I Googled it and came up against some interesting things. One was a blog site called The Happy Feminist, and I'm going to just read out a few things from there. So this person, the Happy Feminist, which immediately, you know, sends up red flags, right? Happy feminist? Can you be a happy feminist? I know. I don't even know if this is a she. The happy feminist is a legal, meaning of the law profession, legal profession, legal, liberated, and loving it. Thoughts of a 30-something married Unitarian dog-loving attorney, right? And this person talks about feminism as a social movement and says that the suffragist movement, the women's rights movement of the 60s and 70s, the reproductive rights movement today are all social movements, okay? But I think of feminism as more of a value system or basic political orientation than an actual movement. It may feed into or create a movement, but it is not in itself a movement. And one of the persons who responds to her says, I definitely don't think of feminism as a political movement. It's an issue, politics is not an issue of gender, this person says. And then goes on to say, I don't even think of feminism as a value system either. And it's almost as though this person is talking himself out of thinking of feminism as any kind of, having any sort of political edge at all. And she says that women are given the same, and a lot of the things she says are right. Excuse me, I keep thinking, women are given the same rights and opportunities as they achieve their education. But once they're out of academia and into the real world, it's coincidentally right when their biological clocks begin to tick. It's all downhill from there. All of that equality stuff goes out the door and we're relegated back to our status as walking reproductive systems. And I think that's a major failure in our culture right now that feminism has not adequately addressed. Not a happy feminist here, not a happy person, not as it turns out, right? So I got to thinking that yes, it's true. How should we see the connection between feminism as a social movement in the sense that it is a values-based system, that it is trying to change values, or as a political system, which I think these people are seeing it as one that actually brings about change through legislation, through political changes, right? Legislation usually, so equal pay, for example, something like that. And of course, we want to think of those two things as inseparable, right? That a social movement definitely is preparing the ground. You cannot, without that, you cannot have a platform for asking for rights, for anything, for any sort of political change. And political change in its turn, of course, shapes the society that we live in, so social values will respond to those in some ways, right? Which brings me to the point that I want to make, that I said is like what Magnolia was saying, is that I think for us and for your generation in particular, it's extremely important to be vigilant about raising the right questions, right kind of what Cynthia Enloe from your field would say, the right feminist questions, to ask the feminist questions, right? And if you are asking the feminist questions, you wouldn't simply ask for equal pay. And I'll tell you why. Just asking for an equal pay, you might even get it. Let's say we're going to be talking about utopia very soon. So you might even you might even get it, but that doesn't do it. So here's why. I teach this course in global gender, the one that Magnolia was in. It's called Sex and Gender in Global Perspectives. And one of the things we look at is the gender gap index, right? This is something it's a report that's prepared by the World Economic Forum annually. It measures the way different countries have achieved closing the gap in gender-based disparities. 144 countries are surveyed in the most current one. And let's say, someone like Bangladesh happens to be one of the countries I looked at with my students this semester. Bangladesh has made amazing progress in closing the gender gap in terms of pay, right? If you look at it more carefully, what you see is that, all right, in Bangladesh, men maybe used to get paid less than $2 a day. Women got paid about $1 a day, or maybe a little bit more. I'm sorry, not a day. Yeah, yes. The women now make closer to the men, what the men make. Well, they're achieving equal pay. Now, what does that mean, right? What does it mean for both men and women to be getting that kind of pay, even if it's equal, even if they got exactly the same pay? Now, it's one of the things that businesses can say, right? That we have achieved gender parity by paying men and women equal for equal work, but they're paying less than $2 a day, right? And that's the kind of feminist question I think we need to be asking. That's the sort of feminist curiosity, Cynthia Enloe said, that you don't take that for granted. I'll give you one more example and I'll pass this on to Anna. I was watching, I have lately become, I'm of the age where, you know, these things really irritate me now. So in India, for example, the Women's Day is, 8th March, right? International Women's Day is celebrated in this completely commercial way. I mean, it's the day for women to receive presents from their menfolk in their lives and, you know, go and spend something, indulge themselves, exactly the kind of thing you were talking about, right? It's this very sort of feel good about yourself, empower yourself as a woman, but it's thoroughly commercialized thing. So I was looking at some of the ads there, and there's this beautifully done ad, slick ad for Asia Air, which is, some of you might know, it's a lower cost airlines that operates in Eastern Asia. And it's this beautiful, it looks at girls and young women and older women and everybody doing things that go against gender norms, right? And they all, and the whole, the message, of course, is that no matter who you are, what kind of a woman you are, what you look like, what you want to do is fly, right? And, you know, fly first metaphorically and then literally fly on Air Asia. And it really would make you feel great, that especially in a place like India, if you are looking at images of all these girls and women doing these amazing things, it's great. But of course, the question to ask Air Asia is, how much do you pay those flight attendants? How many women are in your board, right? How many women are, you know, do women get paid the same as men do? Or do you have only a certain type of look for flight attendants? And, you know, do you fire your flight attendants once they reach a certain age? And, you know, all of those things. None of that. And the seductive thing, of course, is that those kinds of ads really, you know, divert our attention from that. So I think feminism is absolutely a political engagement. It begins with asking those kinds of questions so that we could change lives of people in better ways, but also remembering that just changing women's lives is not going to do it, right? It has to be a much broader, much more inclusive look. Thank you. Sorry, I think I took way more time.
I think you were fine. You were fine. Well, hello, I'm Anna Mercedes. I teach in the Theology department, the Gender Studies department, and very occasionally in the Peace Studies department. It's a pleasure to be here. It was fascinating for me to hear Madhu say, a political movement, what else would it be? Because, of course, the invitation was actually quite a challenge for me as a theologian. Maybe that's not, of course, but it was obvious to me that I had to continually, as I got ready, say to myself, as a political movement, Anna, as a political movement. For me, feminism is firstly a theological framework. I don't mean firstly that would be the most important thing in the world, but for me in my everyday work on this campus, feminism is my default theological framework. I just assume it. So that did make the invitation a challenge for me, one I enjoyed. But, you know, I could give you
50 other 5-minute segments on various theological aspects of feminism. I'd love to do that, but I knew this isn't the Theology on Tap that's later this afternoon or this evening, it's politics. So I kept saying to myself, Anna, don't let yourself do that. I am actually going to for just a minute because I went last. So this is not something I prepared to say, but because I went last, I thought, oh, well, that actually makes me very different on this panel if I even tried to give you a glimmer of what it would be to use it as a theological framework. So I'll just give it 2 minutes of time in case some of you are thinking, oh, a theological framework. So theology often, and I would say, I'm just checking to make sure I agree with the statement, but I do, when it's good, always spills into a politics. A theopolitics, if you will, but you can also say that feminism is not only about someone using their theology to inform their political ethics in the world, or their political, the political models they will endorse. You can also say it's not just about that, it's also on the whole way they turn their analysis to things spiritual. So in other words, yes, because I'm a feminist theologian, I have a particular Christian ethics informed by feminism, but it's also that I have spent time and would encourage anyone curious about a theological framework of feminism to spend time looking at ways patriarchal structures, heteronormative structures, have shaped the way you think of the spiritual, have redefined in your mind what, or have just defined what can be sacred, have made you think that God, if that's an operative category for you, is a certain type of power. Once you turn a feminist analysis on that, all kinds of patriarchal braces on your approach to the spiritual can fall away. And the same will work for queer theology if you're intrigued by that. So it's not just about people using their spirituality or their theology to adopt a certain politics. It's also, in my world, what I do every day, it's also about saying, how has heteronormativity limited my experience of the sacred? So that's how queer theology or feminist theology can function. But that's not why I came tonight. I just felt like, well, if I'm going to be here, I might as well say that. Because, in fact, it was hard for me to hold myself to a political movement. I wondered if a very basic definition might be helpful for some of the folks here. I don't know. I don't know your background with feminism, so I did prepare one, just in case. So this is for the 20 of you who were kind of hoping to get a basic definition. When I started teaching here in 2007, I used to just say that feminism was about the empowerment of all people on the planet. As I was driving over here today, I thought, well, that was pretty broad, Anna. That was a little bit too broad, maybe. So you're going to hear a lot of resonance here with Magnolia's emphasis on empowerment, not about her wanting us to look beyond equality. We resonate a lot there. So as I was driving over, for you, I amended this definition. So if you're new to this conversation, try on for size thinking of feminism as an empowerment movement, especially looking for empowerment of oppressed persons or groups, with special attention to oppression based in sex and gender systems. So the three little nodes of that correspond to some things you've heard here. I didn't firstly say it's an equality movement. That is one of the ways to talk about feminism, and it's important. But Madhu's example of the way in which equality achieved by making $2 a day cannot be the end of a social struggle shows you that empowerment is a concept that can get us further than simply equality. And when I say especially empowerment for oppressed groups, I think it's important to look at the ways that a feminist analysis can also offer a sort of political reformation for those who have been in oppressive social positions as well. Just as a plain example, can feminism be for men? Can feminism be for men who have been in very patriarchal, very oppressive social positions, because lots of men aren't in oppressive social positions? Yes, feminism can also offer a sort of political reform to people who have been in oppressive roles. So it's not just for people who are oppressed, but it is especially for them. And then it does offer special attention to the way sex and gender categories function as systems of oppression, but not only, especially not anymore. And everybody up here, we all think about in our own work ways that gender oppression overlaps with class oppression, overlaps with oppression based on citizenship status and so forth. And you heard that in what my colleagues were saying as well. So that's my very basic definition in case somebody needed one, because I just wasn't sure. Okay, and then I just thought I'd give you something from some different generations of feminism. So here you go. Here's something from what now gets called the first generation of feminism, but is more properly the women's movement, or in that time, and I'm talking about the 1800s, the late 1800s here, often got called the woman movement because it wasn't even, it was so much about a sort of joining together in a singular identity around woman. This wouldn't fly at all anymore. But it did then, that sometimes the literature at that time talks about the woman movement, so very, very singular. I just wanted to give you an example of how a politics can spill to a theology that can spill to a politics. So here you go. So in the, what now gets considered first wave feminism in the 1800s, I'm sticking with the US here, there were women who set out, this isn't the only origin of feminism, this is just one strand, who set out to fight against slavery. And when they tried to, some of these women were Christian women who wanted to fight the idea of slavery based on scripture. You can use scripture to fight for slavery too, but they were using it to fight against slavery. But when they tried to speak, they were told that women shouldn't speak about scripture in public. So here we have a political movement against slavery with people using theological tools to try to fight it and being told that they don't have the right to speak about scripture in public. So that then they start fighting for women's right to interpret scripture and speak in public, and eventually you get a women's rights movement there. Now that's not the only strain, but that's one way that the abolitionist movement converged with Christian biblical interpretation and then ended up as a political movement for women to vote, to be able to speak publicly, and to interpret scripture. So is that a theology or is that a politics? But it very much snowballed into a political movement. And then I thought from the second generation of feminism, or what's really what we can also think of as when feminism has a very strong push in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, I thought I would mention our bodies ourselves as a political movement. One thing I'm always stressing to my students that I work with is that feminism is grounded in our bodies and in our everyday lives. So again, to go back to theology, I wouldn't start with an abstract theory, I would start with our bodily experience. And in the second wave of feminism, people were noticing that a lot of women's healthcare decisions were actually being guided by male-dominated medical industry. And so a really awesome health book was born, and not just a health book, but a collective of women medical professionals. It was called Our Bodies Ourselves. And if you've never explored that, it's time to go online and buy an old copy and a new copy. I like to own several editions. The old ones are fascinating for the ways in which the deeply personal, your own intimate knowledge of your body was a political concern, that your own ability to set the terms of how you give birth is a political concern. That's a really strong political moment in the second wave. And I think I've kind of run out of time, so if you want to ask me about the third and ongoing waves, you can in the Q&A. Here we go. Thanks, everybody.
I do have one already, so I can talk about that. Okay.
How'd you get it so fast? Where'd it come from?
It was. Okay. So the question is, oh, and by the way, I'm going to say these are all very squishy terms. So, what is politics anyway? And if politics, by its broader definition, is anything to do with power or power differentials, which is one definition.
Yeah.
That means and one of the thoughts about feminism was that the personal is political. That was a thing that came out of the second wave of feminism, the notion that anything is political. So your relationships are political and your body is political and everything is, because it's all about power differentials. All right, so this one is, how are women affected by the current US election system, and how do we get more women in office? This is a particularly, this is my thing. This is totally what I would like to do. Okay, so yes, women and minorities are actually both impacted by the way that the US election system is run. Actually, the weirdest thing is that if you crunch some data and look at some studies, the way we have this sort of single member district, first past the post system where you just have one representative, that is actually really bad for women and minorities. And if you look at places which have very high numbers of women in office, Sweden, but even New Zealand, the number of women and minorities increase as if you move to a multi-member district system. If you'd like to know more, there's classes on this in the political science department. But yeah, so if you just use like parliamentary party list ballots, if you want to look that up in the web, in Wikipedia, if you have a party list ballot, it actually helps both women and minorities. It's a weird thing. And we'd get more. So we could change the electoral system. Actually, that would be hard. So we have to think of other things to do because we'd need a constitutional amendment. So the other things that we could do is to encourage political parties to run women candidates. And I would say it's going to be very, very interesting. We already have one of the highest numbers of women running for office in the 2018 election. So watch this space. You could also go to the Center for American Women in Politics. Just do CAWP Rutgers and you'll find it. Fascinating data on how many women are running for office, and as we get closer you'll see how many we have who get past the primaries and are running in many, many levels. So that's enormously encouraging. We may have a real breakthrough, and that would be very, very great, because right now it's 20% of Congress is women, and it's been almost 100 years since women had the vote. So so that's something that we could do. So women run for office would be my answer. But if we imagine that the Women's March and the offshoots of the Women's March, including the people who are just running for office, that could be the answer. If you don't win an electoral office unless you run for it. And it looks like, at last, thank God, women are running for office. So all of you can think about that and run for office anytime, MC, anytime.
Claire, I remember I learned this from you, but you said that it takes something like 8 times.
Yeah, 7 times to be asked. It's 7 times that a woman, guys think they're already qualified, they just run. But women, I'm not kidding, women it takes 7 times before they're asked. So find you, MC, have you thought about running for office? That's your first time, I think. Maybe I've asked you before, it could be your second or third. Find somebody, ask them to run. There's still time. Get on the ballot yourself. You're qualified. You are qualified. Well, some of you aren't qualified to run for senator yet, but but you will be.
And if you are thinking about running within the next 10 years or 15 years or whatever, there's this great organization that just started, and I'm kind of blanking on the name, but I'm pretty sure it's called She Can Run. And their mission is to get 250,000 women running for office in America by the year 2030. And you can donate to them if you have the means to. But if you're looking to run for office, you can reach out to them for resources and support, and they will help you run your campaign and get into office. So there's resources if you look for them. Yeah. I'll read this one. The third wave of feminism seems to attract women who identify as liberal and mock those who identify as conservative. Shouldn't the feminist movement support all types of women as long as they are making choices freely? what can we do to allow feminism to support all women? So this question to me is sort of immediately reminds me of liberal feminism, and liberal feminism isn't necessarily like the traditional way that we think about liberal feminism or like liberalism. It's more about women seeking liberty, so seeking the choices, seeking their ability to make choices, their liberty to make choices. And liberal feminism really seeks to make sure that there are laws and institutional programs that counter the discrimination against women. So, I mean, shouldn't the feminist movement support all types of women as long as they're making choices freely? My whole thesis is no. You don't get a feminist society by taking like a shaker full of women and, you know, sprinkling it all around, and all of a sudden you have women in the workforce, therefore you have a feminist society. You know, feminism seeks to dismantle oppressions, especially the oppressions on female people or feminine people, because it's the feminine in our society that is oppressed. So I'm not saying, like, conservative women by all means can be feminists, liberal women by all means can be feminists, but, you know, supporting a conservative platform or a platform that limits choice isn't necessarily feminist just because a woman is pushing that agenda. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's what I have to say.
Yeah, I'm just going to try to
clarify.
Not clarify. I'm going to try to like shine a flashlight on what Magnolia was just saying, because I think that she has the key there. She had it the first time we went down the panel when she mentioned oppression. That's the thing to hold on to in your mind. So if you're thinking, is this or that feminist? Is this or that expression coming out of this or that woman feminist? Analyze power, as Claire was saying, in your mind, and say, is this trying to counter social oppression? And that's not always easy, because sometimes two different anti-oppression movements can conflict with one another, so this is no simple thing, but that's your key. It's not that women are involved, it's that it's fighting oppression, specifically that which comes in these gender and sex terms. So I'm just wanting to magnify and applaud what Magnolia is saying. I'm sorry. I guess I just wanted to say something. You know, earlier I was talking to you about our bodies ourselves. I could have also told you all sorts of other health issues that are in that book. I picked precisely the conditions under which women give birth because I was trying to gesture to historically conservative and historically liberal. I am sure the political scientists at the other end of the table can do better with these terms than I can. But you know, people think feminism and they do think all sorts of quote unquote liberal political agendas, but the conditions under which women give birth, conservative and liberal women and conservative and liberal men, that's an issue for a lot of us. So that's why I gave you that example. I'm trying to gesture to the ways in which we are fighting, in that case, oppressive conditions under which to welcome life. They have existed, they still do exist.
Just to
Continue
exactly, thank you, of what Anna just said. We were talking in another class about something called transversal politics, and this person who thinks of transversal politics as an alternative to transversal feminism, feminist politics. Mm-hmm. So as different from universalism, which of course, as we know, always historically has masqueraded as a kind of men's way of looking at things, right? So universalism, and on the other hand is the kind of almost infinite breaking up into little pieces, right? That sometimes identity politics can lead us that way, where everyone occupies a space, everyone, maybe with a few other people, occupies a space that is very different from the group of people standing next to you, and which makes it very difficult to come up with any kind of unified political movement, right? So transversal politics, or feminism, is really interesting because it allows for a platform of people who are in many ways really, really different. They think really differently. And all the examples, actually, a lot of the examples come from Israeli women and Palestinian women talking together to bring about peace, right? I mean, if they base their position on their cultural identities, they couldn't talk, right? But if they base their coming together on what can we do to bring about peace, they can talk, right? And other examples are given about reproductive rights issues where, it has polarized feminists so much and so deeply, the whole abortion rights issue, right? And, but all women ought to, men for that matter, everyone ought to worry about or pay attention to care, right? I mean, to having access to health care, prenatal care, postnatal care. Those are things one could talk about, right? So it doesn't matter, again, who you are, and if you're so completely identified with that, it makes it very difficult to come to any kind of decision making or political action for that matter. So yes.
I think that's really interesting. Again, I'm back to institutions, sorry. And I'm not being at all essentialist here at this. I think this is all culturally derived by how we raise and our expectations of women as as the feminine gender. But if you look at the women in the Senate, they have consistently been able to work across party lines, in part because they can work together as a bloc. It's mostly Democrats. It needn't be, but it is. But they have been able to work across party lines to stop government shutdowns, where they've been the only people who turned up during a snowstorm to fix it, right? So, and I don't think that's just because women have, I don't think it's not essential. It's the way that women have been culturally assumed to make compromise and to think about the other person. That's a brilliant, that's a good skill to have. I think some men have this skill, by the way, but I think women tend to have it because that's the way we force women to act. But if you're going to find a way to make an institution like the House of Representatives or the Congress work, which was essentially designed not to work, by the way. You think the founders were smart, but they also didn't trust it, so they made it not work. But the way it can work is that you could have people in there who were aiming to make compromises, and I think that's perfectly it. If they're both women, we can work towards a goal that we both want, and we're going to overlook the fact that I'm a Democrat and she's a Republican. So those are the things where you can see that commonality and move, and that works straight into the sort of institutionalized. That can work in sort of the other side of the social movement too, where you're still marching, and but you can definitely see some of that work too. And this question here: how can the feminist movement expand to include the LGBTQ plus community, women of color, and at the grassroots level? And I think this is a really thorny issue because, there's no one feminist movement. I'm going to say that very clearly. There's lots of people who are allowed to have your own feminist. Like, I'm a white, middle-aged, caring mom of 2 people and a feminist, but I cannot speak for women of color, and if they and I shouldn't. Right? And I shouldn't tell them how to feel or what to believe in or anything else. And I recognize that. But so as a, privileged, I'm a privileged upper middle class woman, highly educated, I've had lots of access to that, then how can I help people who have more than gender as a system of oppression? And I think that constantly thinking about those power differentials is what we all have to do. So I have to deal with this, but maybe the other person has to deal with 4 other things, and I have to think about that at every point. But if we can take a commonality, then we can work towards a goal. And it's all about working towards a goal, even if that goal, even if the goalposts are constantly moving. The Obergefell decision meant that now we have same-sex marriage in the United States. Does that mean that we don't need the social movement that is the gay rights movement? I would say no. I think that we've got some things to do. So we get over that equality piece and we move towards the next step, which is, there may be some more political things we have to do here. So I think that's all I can say is keep working.
So we're getting a lot of questions up here about how can we include conservative women? How can we include the LGBTQ community? How can we include womanists, mujeristas, men, and what is yours? White women. And so my initial reaction to the, conservative women, here's what I was thinking about is most white married women are conservative. Being white and married are 2 very privileged positions, especially in our country. And so what I would advocate for us all to do is to start with the women and the people on the margins of society, the people who experience the most oppression. And if we can't figure out liberative strategies for those people, then any liberative strategies that we're going to figure out for conservative women, for white women, are going to act as, they're going to still, they're not going to be liberative because they're still women being oppressed. And I was going to talk about a pyramid, like, you need to work on the outside and move in, but I don't really like, and Anna will agree with me, but I don't really like the point of the pyramid. It gets smaller as you go up. So when you think about feminism and including all women, think about the Stanley Cup. So you have, it's like,
I didn't know you were going to go.
Yeah. This is brand new, just secured to me. So it's basically straight up and down, right? But it's silver, so there's like kind of multiple layers. So that's, we're all living like in the base of the Stanley Cup, and we're working to this big, round, open, soft feminist utopia that's the cup on top, So when you're doing this, I don't want anyone to think that there's not a place for them within the feminist movement, and I don't want you to think that because there is no consensus among the feminist movement, that you can't, just because feminism isn't just about equality, it doesn't mean that, we can't still have these debates or we can't still think about these different feminist issues and the different intersections that come with them. And yeah, you have equal pay, but that's $2, What does that mean for me? And something else about intersectionality, I don't know what I was going to say. Lost it. Yeah.
Oh, right. So the question, there are a couple of questions, but this is kind of captures the import. How can modern white women enrich the feminist movement without overshadowing other voices that need to be heard? Very good question. And again, historically, the second wave feminism in particular has been criticized by women from elsewhere in the world, and even women in the United States, women of color in the United States, who pointed out that the middle class women you're talking about is not me. Most working class women have never, their struggle was never to find work. Their struggle was something completely different, right? Middle class women were trying to get to find employment. So it historically has been a huge issue, continues to be. It's a lot better, but it continues to be, of course, that Western feminism, again, I'm very broadly speaking, right? Western feminism tends to construct the goals of feminism in certain ways that don't necessarily speak to women all over the world, right? So a good example, and probably by now a cliched example, is that of the veil, right? The whole veil question of Muslim women, that somehow if only Muslim women's veils were taken off, or if they had a choice to wear or not to wear the veil, they would be liberated. So liberation, empowerment, emancipation, all of those things are defined in certain ways that a lot of people in the world just cannot, it doesn't resonate with them. They have other issues. So a lot of women in India, for example, would say, well, we need to feed our children first, right? Then we can think about that. So all those sort of, when your absolute basic material needs are not met, you can't necessarily talk about your identity as a woman, and your voice needs to be heard, right? Yes, but your voice as a woman, whether or not that's the goal, might be secondary. But as Anna was pointing out when she talked, that feminism's goal, feminist movement's goal is really to address situations of oppression. It doesn't matter where or what kind of oppression it is, right? So oppressive groups to work for that. A lot of women in, okay, so the question was, how can they? By listening. There's really no other substitute than to listen. And again, this transversal politics I was talking about earlier makes this point about incomplete knowledge, that be humble. You know that when you are talking to an Afghan woman who might be wearing a burqa, but she is also coming from a world that is quite literally razed to the ground. She's starving, her children are starving. She, and probably her mother too, I mean, for 2 generations they have grown up in war-ravaged world, right? That's all they know. You cannot assume that you can tell her what her struggle ought to be, or how she is going to liberate herself through a feminist agenda. Have to listen. You have to realize that the knowledge you bring is incomplete, and the knowledge she brings can in some way move it towards more completion. It's never complete, of course, but humility, ask questions, work with them, not for them, right? Those are what I would say.
Okay, I'll just jump in on this same topic.
Okay.
I think I have my own mic. Okay. So one of the questions down the table says, Magnolia read it, I think it's the blue handwriting there. Yeah, thank you. How can the feminist movement expand to include LGBTQ plus community and women of color at the grassroots level? The feminist movement is the LGBTQ community and women of color at the grassroots level right now. I've been sitting here in my mind thinking, could I teach an entire 4-credit course where the entire view of feminism came from the LGBTQ community? I could. There's enough material, maybe 4 semesters, more. I mean, I can't even find an end to it in my mind. And then also women of color, easily, your entire access point to feminism and your rich study of it for years could come from women of color doing feminist work. There's just no end to that right now. There's plenty. And so then another question says, how does feminism broadly support womanist and mujerista movements? Womanist and mujerista movements are supporting feminism. They are feminism. So if in your mind anywhere there's like this great white feminism and then these other small satellite feminisms, just analyze that in your mind in terms of oppression and realize that that kind of model or understanding is perpetuating a white supremacist oppression, right? And so it's, of course, that's part of the air we breathe, and so don't feel bad if that little model is in your head, but try not to support it much longer. That great white feminism is problematic in itself. So there's a question here that got passed right to me because it started with the Catholic Church. So they just passed it down. The Catholic Church doesn't allow women to be priests. How do we go about dismantling the system of oppression while also making sure that Catholic churches are not shamed? So I am not going to take the next 5 hours, so I'm going to give you my very quick answer, which is, do not fear shame. Remember how the story of Jesus deals with shame and how Jesus survived it, and trust that a church can too.
This one I think is for me. Perhaps we should focus less on finding space for certain groups and focus more on how we can contribute to the struggle. Doesn't this mean a commitment to both listening and acting? And so immediately when I read that, I was like, okay, I didn't explain myself well enough. But Judith Butler, who she's a really important feminist. She talks about living your life in a way that makes other people's lives more livable. So, in what ways can I sort of like queer, or can I subvert the everyday image of what it means to be a woman, or what it means to be a man, or what it means to be a Catholic, in ways that make, other people who don't identify with this monolithic experience able to live their lives more openly. So, So the way your question is exactly the answer, The way you contribute to the struggle is to make more space, to make more options, to make more room. That's what I was talking about with the Stanley Cup, It's not about constricting the rights of other groups, and it's about opening up the world so that people can be themselves fully, so that they are able to choose the different sort of ways they want to work, ways they want to have families, ways they want to make money, ways they want to study. It's about opening up the world for people. It's not about, it's about opening up the world. So I'm going to end on.
And I'll just spin that in a sort of policy direction. And I totally agree. We must listen. We must not assume that the main circle is white middle class feminism, and then you have these extras. And it's all part of the same movement. But at any one point, you don't need to feel bad about if you want to work for equal pay. Go ahead. Please. Just remember that other people may be fighting worse oppression. But it's an honorable struggle. Go ahead, and always remember that allies are, you can be an ally as well as working on your policy. There are other policies to be had, and some people can be feminist and just keeping their heads above water, and that may be all they can do. While if you're a member of a more privileged group, you might be able to go and become a senator and change things. Please, go ahead. MC, go ahead. I'm just picking on MC. It's just because she's right in my line of sight. Because I know Megan's here somewhere. So, make sure that you, listening's important, but there's also these other things that we need to get done within the system that we have. I love that, living your life in a way that makes other people more comfortable. That's great. But there are many things that you can do. So if it's a political movement, there are some things that are policy choices that we need to fight for. And I'm just going to point out that November is how many months away? So just be thinking about that. There are many things that we can do to move things forward every day that would make things better, and it may just be on an institutional level, and that's not everything, but it's a good thing. So November, think about it.
That is all the time we have, but please feel free to stay and ask questions after. Thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you to the IWL for helping support this event. Before I let you go, I just want to remind you that the next Politics in a Pint is, it's titled Understanding Activism, Voices of Generation, with our spring resident, LaToya Green. That will be on Wednesday, March 28th at 5:15 p.m. in the Quad. Just kidding, that one's here. the one after that is in the quad, which is on artificial intelligence. That will be on April 3rd in quad 264 at 7:30 p.m. We are starting to look at topics for Politics in a Pint next semester. I won't be here, I won't be leading them anymore, but please, again, my name is Maya Hermerding. Reach out to me at the McCarthy Center, and I would love to hear your ideas. Thank you.